A sharp increase in anomalous activity has been reported in the Death Valley National Park. More specifically, the source seems to be the Devil's Hole cave system. The cave is unmapped and was thought at first to only be around 500 feet deep and completely filled with water. However, a recent discovery suggests that the cave may be thousands of meters deep, and only some of the caverns discovered were flooded. Natural physics suggests that all the caverns under the water source should be flooded as well. But for some reason, some of these caverns were empty and completely dry. Things came to a head when authorities noticed a recent uptick in missing people, both locals and tourists, traced to the Devil's Hole. At first, suspicions were that the people were getting lost. However, some of the individuals were locals that gave cave tours for a living. Another suspicion was inspired by the People of the Cavern myth. The People of the Cavern are rumored to be a small tribe of human-like beings, claimed by locals to be responsible for the cultist insignias that line the mountains of Death Valley. This could make sense, as these same insignias were found in newly discovered caverns in the Devil's Hole. However, these people are thought to be an old wives' tale, held and spread by locals, perhaps to attract more tourist revenue. Despite the accusation, many locals remain staunch in their stance that the cave people exist. To find the cause of these missing people, the Death Valley Police Department has contacted a professional cave mapper, Maxwell Brodenberg, to shed light on what exactly is happening in the cave. In the attempted completed mapping of the Devil's Hole, new evidence would come to light, leading to the dismissal of the People of the Cavern theory. While there was evidence of human habitation in many of the areas, there were no actual people seen, and there was no evidence that these were anything more than temporary homeless camps. As the mapper went deeper, he noted a smell of rot and decay that became stronger the further he voyaged into the cave. The deeper Maxwell went, the stranger that both the cave and the cultish insignias became. Maxwell noted that the layout of the cavern made no sense in a 3D space, often displaying impossible geometry. Some caverns that were thousands of feet deep would lead to spaces that were so close to the surface, one could see sunlight, and vice versa. Droplets shot upwards from stalagmites, creating puddles of water that collected on the ceiling as if gravity were reversed in only that spot. When he left that area and came back, it was flipped right side up. Sometimes he would walk from one cavern to another, only to be in the exact same room. Maxwell struggled to explain his findings to the authorities, but it helped that he had a digital camera and photographic evidence of many of the things that he claimed. After a week of mapping, he had made little progress in discovering the nature of the cave. On his 7th day exploring the cavern, Maxwell did not return. A search party was sent to find him after a few days. The search team was equipped with standard caving equipment, as well as a wired communication line directly to the surface team. While the physical line remained intact, communication from the search team went dark shortly after they were out of view. The search party reported similar anomalous happenings in the cave, and of the 5 members sent, only one returned. Even though communication was cut, the surviving member, Isaac Walters, claimed that he continued to converse with what he thought was the surface team throughout the expedition. He also claimed that the surface team gave some of his team members direct instruction to explore caverns in which they met their demise or disappeared. The only reason Isaac was able to find his way out of the cave was by following the phone cord. Isaac claimed to have found what he believes to be the remains of Maxwell Brodenberg. Isaac's report to authorities is as follows. There were only 2 of us left when I found the mapper, or what was left of him. His body looked deflated, like an old balloon, a juice pouch slurped dry, a deflated trash bag of a man that looked like his skin could be draped out like a yoga mat. When I approached his body, if you could even call it that, I saw that he had 2 large puncture wounds in his lower back, like someone had stuck metal pipes into him. His skeletal fingers, loosely adorned with skin, were wrapped around a digital camera. I took the camera and examined the contents. After doing so, I froze, not only because of what was on the camera, but because I had realized the body, and the only other remaining member of my team, were gone. The final photo taken on the digital camera is dated on the same day that Maxwell went missing. This is the photo. Holy guano! Some sort of anomalous cave system with unexplainable qualities that possibly contains a cult, but definitely contains a monster. Because the cave is utterly mind-bending, let's start simple and see what we can gauge about the spider. Evidently, this spider has intense photophobia, which means it's afraid of light and will react violently to any bright light source. If it wasn't planning on eating him already, that's probably why Maxwell ended up as some sort of used condom man. To find its prey, the creature has bioluminescent and photoreflective eyes. To be able to see in the cave, these eyes must be incredibly sensitive to all light, and this is likely the reason for the animal's photophobia in question. Like all spiders, this spider eats by locking the prey in place with its jaws, injecting a corrosive acid that dissolves the innards of the prey, and slurping the now jello-like insides out. The acid that it uses to dissolve the inside of its host reduces all but the bones to a slush, and for some reason, it leaves the skin intact as well. Another interesting thing, this spider's anatomy suggests that it actually may not be a spider at all. You see, this quote-unquote spider has a lot of features that look almost mammalian. For example, a typical spider foot looks like this. That was way cuter than I personally expected, and now I'm thinking about cute little spider paws. That's not what this guy has though, as his legs look like they end in some sort of horrible hand structure with clawed fingers. Looking closer at the beast, it's almost as if some of its features look not only mammalian, but distinctly human. The texture of its carapace resembles that of human skin closely, and if we look at this animal from a side view, we can tell that this spider's head has an almost human-like skull and jaw structure. Almost as if this creature was once a man, or a woman. Spider Monster is legally required not to discriminate. While the concept of a man spider seems impossible, we have to remember that a lot of the shit reported in the cave seems impossible. My theory is that this cave is for some reason an anomalous hotspot. I mean, come on, it's named the Devil's Hole. It's not that far off. That preternatural beings and happenings are either attracted to or formed by this cave. This would explain the phenomena and layout within the cave, the myths of the strange cult spread by locals, and the spider being as well. The spider creature could be the remains of what used to be a missing person, somehow mangled by the cave into an otherworldly arachnid appearance. It could also be some sort of local fauna that evolved within the cave itself. If the rules of geometry and physics are different in the cave, it's possible that the laws of biology and evolution are different as well. This suggests that it's possible that this being evolved within the cave to hunt humans who became lost and trapped due to its confounding nature. A collection of mysterious fossils was recently discovered in the mountains of Death Valley National Park. These fossils appear to depict a group of creatures belonging to a species which has no known ancestors in Earth's tree of life. At first, the researchers at the corporation studying the various phenomena taking place in Death Valley, Lucicorp, believed it to be from an extinct family of prehistoric aquatic creatures. This would make sense, as the desert of Death Valley was underwater in the Paleozoic period, some tens of millions of years ago. Hence, many ocean fossils have been discovered in this region. On the suspicion that they had found something unique, Lucicorp sent a sample of these fossils to be carbon dated and further analyzed. The study into the nature of these remains would tell an unexpected story. The bones were arranged in a manner that didn't correspond to any known classification in the planet's biological history. It looked as if someone tried to recreate a vertebrate version of an octopus. The skeleton itself resembled a sea spider, but with a few more extra, more malicious-looking pieces. The creature had 8 long limbs, each made up of many small segments. The base of the animal looked like 8 human spines all sutured together at a center locus. Some of them had limbs that would split into 2 more further down the arm. These legs looked as if they could move in any orientation. At the top of the skeleton lies a bulb-shaped skull with a 4-pronged set of jaws holding multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth. At the corner of each lip was a forward-facing eye socket, further indicative of a predatory feeding pattern. Also notable about the skull, it had a much larger allocation for the brain than any other animal of its size at the time, suggesting a higher brain-to-body mass intelligence quotient. Strangely, even though this fossil was found in a region known for paleoaquatic life, it had many of the telltale signs of an animal that walked on land. Even stranger, it showed a bone structure capable of suspensory movement, like some species of primate. It didn't seem to have many useful ways of propelling itself underwater either, and the structures it did have looked more like taloned versions of apes' hand feet rather than fins. When the fossil's lab data came back, it revealed that these animals existed quite recently, as the carbon in their bones dated back only a few hundred years. Whatever these things were, they weren't ancient. Not only this, but results from other tests showed that this stone was in fact much more similar to stone found in a nearby cave system than that of the mountain. Despite the area in which the fossils were found and the weathered appearance of the remains, the overwhelming evidence pointed to the collection of skeletons coming from a modern creature, possibly still alive within the Devil's Hole cave system. This cave system was already known to display several qualities that seem to confound modern science, including shifting layout and geology, aberrations in the laws of physics and biology, and several strange, even anomalous creatures that make up an ecosystem straight out of H.P. Lovecraft's wet dreams. Lucicorp, fascinated at the prospect of a novel creature living only within the cave system, sent a team of 2 people into the cave in order to investigate this creature and try to capture a living specimen for exhibition display. 1 professional cave mapper, Matthew Brodson, and 1 doctorate revokee / self-proclaimed cryptozoologist, Maria James. They were given a dossier filled with all known dangers within the cavern, a standard issue spelunking kit, a week's worth of food rations, and 1 camera each. They were instructed to avoid anything that did not fit the description of the animal that the skeleton belonged to. The 2 entered the cave, and within 2 hours, only the cryptozoologist emerged, looking like she had been through intense trauma. Even though Maria had only been in the cave for a little over 100 minutes, she claimed that they had been in there for several days, and her physical state reflected this. Not only this, but she claimed that throughout her time in the cave, she and her team member were being stalked by an incredibly intelligent subterranean predator. The very same animal they were sent in to capture. One that not only used its intelligence to pursue them and successfully capture and consume the cave mapper, but also to torment Maria and let her escape, seemingly all for its own entertainment. Maria's recollection of the time is as follows. As we started making our way deeper into the cave, we noticed these weird little piss-bile yellow-colored spotlights, if you could call them that, would sometimes be pointed at our backs, only when we weren't looking. As we turned around, there was no source to the light. This one time I thought I saw where it came from just before it dimmed, but when I shined my flashlight at it, I saw what looked like any other big lumpy rock. I moved my flashlight away for just a second and heard a frantic scuttling, moved it back, and the rock was gone. I had read in the dossier that the cave could shift. I just chalked it up to that. We tried to ignore it, but we had the sense that we were being watched. These incidents would be relatively few and far between in the first few days, but it happened enough to seriously unsettle us. Brodson went ahead to check the next cavern for hazards, and he turned around to give me the signal for an all clear. I noticed his entire back was dimly lit. I told him this, and upon turning around, the spotlight focused on his neck. Something jumped from the darkness and pulled him inside the next room. I ran back to the last room, and this time, the cave actually did shift. In an instant, his screams were silenced and there was only a single passage forward in front of me. I walked forward for days on end. Every time I would turn around, that same disgusting yellow light would flash like a strobe light behind me. It was overwhelmingly bright, blinding me for split-second spans. In between the strobes, there was a background light it generated. I could see it. It was eating Brodson. It had already finished his head and was working its way down the shoulders. It made this horrible, quick chittering noise, like the call of a cicada mixed with psychopathic laughter. Each of its soulless, dead eyes locked with mine, and it looked like it was proud of itself, relishing my fear. I don't know why it didn't just kill me. I never wanted to turn around, but I kept doing it. Each time it showed off how much it managed to work its way down what was left of Brodson. I collapsed from exhaustion a few times, and I would awaken to that horrible laugh inches from my face, waking me up in a panic, scrambling to my feet and sprinting forward with everything I had. This one time, I woke up to the tip of Brodson's severed finger that it had placed in my mouth. I shrieked and wove around to see he was completely gone. That thing had finished him. In between blinding flashes, I saw the creature's blood-stained lips laughing its mocking screech, and one of its limbs pointed at me, like it was telling me I was next. That sadistic fuck was toying with me. It was in the last of these terrifying wake-up calls that I managed to burst from the mouth of the cave. I thought I was going deeper, but I guess not. I don't know what that thing was, and I don't give a fuck. For all I care, we should just nuke that fucking cave. Nuke the fucking cave? That's just what Shoggoth says when she waxes her... It appears that the mysteries within the Devil's Hole cave system only deepen. A novel anomalous creature, unlike anything seen before, has been discovered in this cavern.
First, in the forms of a couple spooky skeletons that Lucicorp thought were really old, except they turned out to be not that. Since these creatures were seemingly so alien in nature, it was almost impossible to determine what these things were before they voyaged into the cave. But I'm pretty sure Lucicorp knew they weren't friendly when they threw those two innocent people at it. When living, these creatures closely resemble octopi, except with many more bony bits, and four-pronged heads that can rotate to any orientation on their legs. Strangely enough, these animals share quite a lot with octopi biologically. For example, like the noble octopus, crawlers have 3 hearts, smell and taste mostly through sensory organs in their arms, and display incredible intelligence, even compared to humans. I mean, I saw a person eat a handful of sand yesterday, so humans are a low bar, but still pretty cool. They have short and long-term memory, express curiosity and exhibit play behaviors, and have also been observed tormenting prey items. I guess intelligence really has the wholesome and horrible as 2 sides of the same coin, huh? These creatures also display a highly advanced form of camouflage shared with octopi. They have chromatophores to change color with the rock texture and lighting so that they can sneak up on prey items like humans and cavern people. Not only this, but they also have organs on their skin called papillae, which are raised portions of the skin that the cave crawler can use to change the texture of its skin to match the sections of stone behind it. The combination of these two allows for almost indetectable camouflage, especially when hunting creatures that aren't used to the lighting conditions of the cave. You know, like you. This animal displays a unique method of limb regeneration. The cave mapper, while trying to save his own life, discovered this creature's Hydra effect after he sliced off the tip of one of its limbs with a pocket knife. 2 words you never want to hear in the same sentence: impromptu and circumcision. Footage of his body cam as he was being slowly eaten alive showed that this creature would regenerate 2 limbs in place of the one severed. This would explain the seemingly random amount of limbs displayed on some of the fossilized skeletons. Also notable is the cave crawler's incredible mastery of bioluminescence. With a bioluminescent organ in the back of its throat, it's capable of a multitude of impressive light tricks. For instance, it can use this to communicate with other crawlers, to disorient and track its prey, and even to make shadow puppets. Now do a dog. She's so talented. Yeah, it's a she. Stop asking to see it, you fucking pervs. These creatures are highly individualistic, and only congregate for the purposes of sexy times and cannibalizing each other. Sometimes one will lead to the other, but I think that's just a weird kink thing for some of them rather than a mating ritual, because they don't do it across the board. Only the really pervy ones. Speaking of what they eat, these animals have been seen feeding on humans, the cavern people, and even some of the larger and more dangerous anomalous animals within the cave. If there is an apex predator for this ecosystem, thus far, the crawler has the top spot. Also because I really haven't seen anything else eat it. I'm going to eat it. This is what it would look like if I made it in Spore. I like Spore. What? The land octopus? Giant half-man spider? How could they possibly think that? It's not like they're at all missing the point about this being a fucking cartoon.
The Devil's Hole cave system in Death Valley National Park has become a locus for supernatural phenomena. After a troubling pattern of disappearances in and around the cavern, authorities began sending investigators into its depths. Some had successful expeditions, but in the end, those who sought to map the cave only joined the numbers of those it claimed. On the occasions that the explorers did return, they always described monsters and hazards of an indescribable nature.
Which I always thought was kind of weird. Because, like, if you're describing them as indescribable, then they've just been described. Wait, indescribable is a description in the first place, so the word just makes no sense. I'm getting off track. Among the oddities found within the caverns, one room in the cave proved especially confounding. Dubbed Medusa's Den, this room was found by investigator Mark Fischbach. No relation, but we're gonna use his picture. Please don't sue me. Upon returning from his first expedition, investigator Fischbach provided evidence of a massive cavern within the cave, containing what at first appeared to be limestone statues of people in incredible pain. The faces of the statues suggest that they're screaming in agony, like they were given birth to spiny sea urchins. Strangely enough, the statues were wearing cloth clothes as well, and had completed anatomy under them. The clothes that these statues were wearing were from various eras of history. Some looked like they were from the days of cavemen. Some looked like prospectors trying to strike it rich during the gold rush. Some looked like they went missing this week, right down to the fresh Heinz mustard stains on their quadruple XL Supreme shirts. There were also statues of small animals like rats, frogs, and scorpions. Even stranger, occasionally he noted statues of spiders as tall as his waist, one of a humanoid creature that definitely wasn't stolen directly from the descent, even one of some sort of giant predatory land cephalopod. I really like what you've done with the place, Mommy Cave. He returned from the cave on his first expedition with no struggle or fear. However, he looked notably paler than when he went in, but it wasn't like he had seen a ghost. He relayed all information very matter-of-factly, and did not resist at all when Lucicorp assigned him to return to the cave the next day. This wasn't the classic psychological reaction of blood draining from someone's face due to fear. Upon shaking a Lucicorp executive's hand, they stated that it was almost like the texture and hue of the skin was changing. It was gray and hard. It felt like dusty sandpaper. The next day, Fischbach undertook his second expedition. The first time he went in, he said that it took him at least an hour of exploring deep within the cave before he came across the room. The second time, he said he found it almost immediately, and to his surprise, it was far closer to the surface than the first time. Not only this, but the room appeared much larger. There were many more statues, and they were arranged in a circle, all pointed towards a central locus. Fischbach noted that among the statues, many of them resembled the tourist that had recently gone missing. He came and went from the cave with no issue. Even though he reported being inside for only a few hours, he left for the expedition at the crack of dawn and returned at midnight. The second time Fischbach returned, his epidermis looked more similar to the skin of an elephant than that of a man. It was dry, hard, and flaky, and it audibly shifted and cracked as he moved. Fischbach had not noticed this until informed of his condition by those he was debriefing. Upon becoming aware of his state, he panicked and begged the Lucicorp executives to seek out the source of a potential cure. Originally, both Fischbach and representatives of Lucicorp agreed that this was clearly emblematic of the Greek myth of Medusa, hence the name they chose for the cavern. Samples taken from Fischbach's rapidly changing skin revealed a different cause for this anomalous disease. It appears that this affliction is caused by a newly discovered species of fungus native to the Devil's Hole, hereby dubbed Gorgon spores. These spores cause the calcification of biological material when in contact with a living animal. Translation, they turn meaty bits into rocks. When touched, eaten, or inhaled, these spores will bind to organs and tissues and calcify them into limestone. You're probably wondering, what's the fucking point of turning people into rocks? Just for funsies? Well, it's not just for funsies. It's actually integral in how these Gorgon spores feed. You see, these spores are an extremophile species of fungus that feeds on limestone deposits within the cave. However, just like Hansel and Gretel learned, if you eat your house, the maintenance costs are gonna be crazy, and that's why you gotta stick more candy all over the walls. And by candy, I mean dead people turn into rocks. Hence why these spores convert animals into limestone. It's 'cause they're hungry. Through a heretofore unknown process, the Gorgon spores first calcify their victims, and then use a specialized acid to dissolve the calcified rock, allowing metals and inorganic ions present in the newly formed stone to be used as the fungus's energy source.
Nature is just so beautiful sometimes. I mean, not right now. This makes me want to light a hornet's nest on fire and throw it in a school, but I don't know, man. Eat a random mushroom from the forest.
It's thought that the Gorgon spores are at least partially the reason that the cave can shift and morph so fluidly, as the constant influx of new limestone from this cavern could be used to restructure the cave, as the fungus constantly breaks it down and feeds on it. I got that last part from the Lucicorp files that I didn't steal, but for once the humans look like they're onto something, so credit where credit is due. Evidently, the spores are not limited to Medusa's den, but can travel with any host that's been infected. Fischbach continued to calcify even when he was kept on the surface, showing evidence that the cave spores will continue to feed off of their prey, even when outside of their native environment. He begged to be sent back into the cave in search of a cure, and Lucicorp readily agreed to send him back next morning. Upon daybreak, Investigator Fischbach had become completely calcified, his face stricken with the same excruciating expression as those claimed by Medusa's den. Lucicorp has gone on record stating that it intends to use his body to explain the natural process of how the Gorgon spores fucking eat people to fat tourists. They're quoted on record as saying,
Investigator Fishbach's sacrifice will not be in vain, as his remains will educate those who will inevitably come from every corner of the earth to experience the majesty of the Devil's Hole anomalies. The Death Valley National Park has become home to what at first appeared to be cult activities. These phenomena are centered around the Devil's Hole cave system. The cave is unmapped and was only thought at first to be around 500 feet deep. Recent discoveries suggest that the cave may be thousands of feet deep and displays numerous anomalous qualities. After a series of disappearances in and around the cavern, the Death Valley Police Department sent an investigator to map the cave. Before his passing, the investigator discovered, among other phenomena, that the laws of physics can function differently within the cavern. Not only this, but the layout of the cave is rumored to morph and change, trapping any occupants in an ever-shifting limestone maze, evidently inhabited by dangerous and otherworldly fauna. The disappearances didn't cease following the discovery of the nature of the Devil's Hole. In fact, they seemed to increase. Not only this, but the seemingly paranormal nature of the disappearances attracted a crowd of what called themselves supernatural tourists. Curious as to the anomalous nature of the cave, these tourists flocked from all over to get a chance to see it for themselves. Despite knowing full well of the dangers of the cave, the locals seek to profit off this. However, with the cave closed to any individual not involved in the investigation or law enforcement, this would prove difficult. In attempts to monetize the confounding nature of the Devil's Hole, an independent contracting company, Lucicorp, approached the Death Valley Police Department and proposed a deal. If Lucicorp were to completely fund and undertake all facets of the cavern investigation, they would be able to access the grounds on whatever basis they would like. This would allow the Death Valley PD to focus their limited resources on their police work rather than ghost busting, as Lucicorp put it. The Death Valley Police Department, already stretched thin and unprepared when it comes to handling non-anomalous phenomena, reluctantly agreed to hand over the entire operation to Lucicorp. Lucicorp organized their first expedition into the cave the same day that they began planning infrastructure for tourism endeavors. Richard Gray was the first investigator hired by Lucicorp to explore the cave. He was given a corded expedition phone, a digital camera, and a hazmat suit. Mr. Gray was in the cave for several days. Upon exiting the Devil's Hole, Mr. Gray had been stripped of his hazmat suit and the rest of his clothes. He looked incredibly pale and was in severe distress. He had no knowledge of why he was naked. He was also seemingly surprised that he was naked in the first place. Mr. Gray's report of his time in the Devil's Hole is as follows. When I first entered the cavern, it looked like any other flooded cave. As I turned back to face the surface, the light that had previously illuminated my back dissipated, and I was facing a solid rock wall. I turned back around to reveal a circular room, lit by a fire in the middle. The cord to the phone was now outstretched in front of me, leading me further into the cave. The walls were lined with what looked like a deep red mix of cave paintings and cultish iconography. It looked somehow both meticulously painted in some parts and splattered with reckless abandon in others. I followed the phone cord and cultish symbols into another room, then another, then another. I lost track after the 12th or 13th. They all looked the same. Upon getting deeper into the cave, I heard screaming, desperate screams for help. This wasn't all I heard. There were also a series of violent, cacophonous clicking noises. I turned back to go in the other direction, but the cave cut me off again. I had no choice. The horrible chorus got louder as I followed it. The symbols and the cord to another room yet again illuminated with fire. It's almost as if the cave were leading me to witness this. I saw a group of what I could only describe as bat people, things, whatever, drag a tourist that had been reported missing several days ago onto a carved slab of stone. He must have been 300 pounds, but one of them picked him up and threw him on the slab like he was nothing. They pulled out a blade and cut him from his neck to his crotch. Then they began to eat the vital organs, heart, kidneys, liver, and intestines. They finished their meal by scalping him, cracking his skull like a coconut, and eating the brain. Then they split his legs and arms down the middle, cracking the bones and pulling them to make it look like he had 8 limbs rather than 4. I almost puked at the sight of it, and I couldn't take it anymore. I followed the phone cord past it as silently as I could, but I accidentally kicked a small pebble. All of them swerved around and stared directly at me. They instantly burst into a sprint and repeated their grating, clicking noises as fast as a machine gun. I snapped a picture, and they seemed to hate the flash.
They stopped momentarily, screeching in pain. I used the opportunity to slip through a crack in the wall, and the second I was out of that room, there was only a solid rock wall behind me. No monsters. I followed the cord back to the surface, and nothing weird happened on the way out. It's almost like the cave wanted me to get out. Please don't make me go back down there. Mr. Gray was sent back to the cave a few days after his initial report. He went missing on his second expedition. The next day, Lucicorp hired another investigator. As the bodies piled up, it would soon become clear that the way Lucicorp saw it, as long as they could keep finding investigators to sacrifice to the cave, they could keep their potential tourist business feasible. It appears that the anomalous Devil's Hole cave system has a whole cult of wild and wacky monstrosities living inside of it. I wonder if someone's gonna go on to explain what exactly these weird cave people are. Probably not, though. The cavern people have incredibly pale, almost bony skin. The texture of their skin is described as an entire body callus. They also have large, blacked-out photoreflective eyes. These creatures are violently photophobic, similar to the cave spider from the previous entry. They have rat-like face whiskers for sensing the environment, and disproportionately large triangular ears to hear things real good. The cave people also have fishhook-shaped claws on the ends of their fingers and toes for multiple reasons. None of them are sexual, I promise. One reason is for use in hunting and killing. Another is for use in fishing the incredibly endangered fish that live in the waters of only the Devil's Hole. And yet another is for use in scaling the walls and ceilings of the cave. The teeth of the cave people resemble those of a crocodilian, likely having something to do with their fish-heavy diet and the need to quickly skewer those slippery bastards. The cavern people seem to hunt using a mix of scent and echolocation. They echolocate using a series of similar, yet quite distinct clicks. Whereas the language clicks have more of a variable rhythm and tone, the hunting clicks seem to be consistent in speed and pitch. Upon dissection of the parts of the corpse that we did not eat, it was revealed that the smell and hearing centers of this creature's brain were exceptionally large compared to that of a human's. Examination of its sinuses and facial structure suggests an olfactory system more similar to a bloodhound than that of a man. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they smell Mr. Gray if they have such good noses? And it's probably because their supreme sniffers in question were overwhelmed with the scent of iron and McDonald's in that fat guy's blood. Despite some of their more animalistic and brutal actions, the people of the cavern are actually quite intelligent. So much so that they've mastered tool use and discovered fire. Whether or not they did this independently or copied off the humans' homework is unknown. The pictograph that they paint around the cave and on the hills of Death Valley at night show an understanding of symbolism and a capacity for abstract thought. Their clicking language alone suggests a complex and intelligent brain. I mean, that one joined the pyramid scheme, so they're not all geniuses, but you know, there's a wide range just like humans. The most obvious identifier of the cavern people's intelligence are their religious practices, demonstrated by former investigator, professional spelunker, and current probable corpse, Richard Gray, and his notation of their ritualistic consumption of human beings who find themselves in the cave. It appears that the cave people consume the majority of the vital organs of the individual, but leave the rest of the flesh intact, save for carving the limbs in such a manner that they effectively look as though they've become doubled. The cave people probably used to just wait for people to go into the cave to get ritualistically eaten, but due to the annexation of the cave, they likely now just abduct humans under the cover of darkness. So just like a lot of the times that humans try to fix shit, they inevitably just made it worse, and the main people it's affecting are people who had nothing to do with the decision at all, and disagreed with it in the first place. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. Usually when people say the Devil's Hole, they're talking about the anus. Nah, I doubt it. They were engineered to be perfectly legally distinct. Besides, they got way better knockoffs to take care of before they come after this shit show. So, if you're watching this, sue Rick and Morty first. A novel species of gargantuan predatory salamander was recently discovered in an underground body of water in the Devil's Hole cave system. As an adult, the average length of this creature from nose to tip of the tail is around 12 feet or 3.65 meters. This is roughly the same size as the American alligator. This salamander was first discovered by an investigator of the Devil's Hole, sent by the company in charge of monitoring the cave's activity, Lucicorp. This salamander, hereby dubbed the slime dragon, was first documented when an explorer of the cave set up motion-activated flash cameras in and around one of the subterranean rivers. The first image that was delivered back to Lucicorp HQ was the face of the slime dragon. The second was the creature generously demonstrating its feeding habits on the explorer in question. Evidently, the investigator explored the bowels of the cave before exploring the bowels of the salamander. This animal is closely related to the pet store variety axolotl, and its physiology is incredibly similar despite a few key differences. One of these key differences is that it's fucking giant. Another key difference is that this creature is completely blind, and its eyes have become vestigial over thousands of years of not being used in the pitch-black environment of the cave. Now they just got the same milky white eyes as your friend's really old dog that they insist is still breathing, but you're not so sure. Instead of hunting using its eyesight, this animal detects prey using the movements of the water currents, similar to many crocodilians. If one is in the same water as a slime dragon, it would help to keep as still as possible, as any ripples you create in the water will lead it straight to you. It's like a deadly game of Marco Polo. The creature has incredibly sensitive skin that it partially breathes through, but this same sensitivity helps the slime dragon locate its prey with great efficiency. All without needing eyeballs. While this sensitive skin is not very protective and can be easily damaged, this is counterbalanced because another trait that the animal shares with the axolotl is the ability to regrow entire limbs and sections of their body or skin. The Devil's Hole slime dragon has also developed electromagnetic sensors on its lower jaw to help it detect the electric biosignatures left in the environment by living animals, making it all the more effective at hunting. All without the use of sight. Alright, now you're rubbing it in. As a child, this creature is quite similar to a regular axolotl. It's actually indistinguishable from regular ones, save for the fact that it has developed sharp teeth and a much more advanced predation strategy. As a baby, it's the size of an adult regular axolotl, and as it grows, it feeds on larger and larger prey. Another key difference between this giant man-eating axolotl and a regular one is what happens when it goes through puberty. While most amphibians eventually metamorphose, trade their gills for lungs, and move out of the fully aquatic lifestyle, this is not the case for axolotls. They instead retain the gills and stay entirely aquatic in a condition known as paedomorphism. Ew. Hashtag axolotl is over party. This is not the case for the Devil's Hole slime dragon, because it likes consenting adults, like people who don't get stabbed to death in prison. And while it does retain its gills and the ability to breathe water, it will also grow lungs, like in most other amphibian metamorphosis, allowing it to easily traverse land and water. Once Lucicorp was made aware of the slime dragon's existence, they sent a team of biologists into the cave in attempts to capture one of the babies. For once, this went off without a hitch, and the biologists returned shortly after, strangely with no note of anomalous interference whatsoever. The team did note that they found a small pool of water completely filled to the brim with baby slime dragons. Almost immediately. They didn't even have to look. It was the first thing they saw dead center of the first cavern. That's not suspicious. Strangely enough, the small pool wasn't being fed by any other larger body of water. It was just there, in isolation. The team gathered 15 of the babies and brought them back to headquarters for study. Because the slime dragons are completely blind, they adapted quite well to captivity. The animals didn't have any obvious anomalous features, and to all external measures, seemed to be just a larger, more dangerous cousin to the axolotl. It's entirely possible that this creature evolved from its smaller, benign pet store cousin, whether it be related to the anomalous cave or not. Noting that these creatures could be contained and cared for just about as easily as alligators, Lucicorp decided to keep them on display in attempts to show the public that they totally had a safe level of control over the anomalies related to the cave, and should be trusted to put a Disneyland-style resort inside of the literal pit of hell. If dragging a big slimy cum-covered lizard out of the ground doesn't show they got this handled, what will? Obvious foreshadowing is obvious. Did you know that axolotls are illegal to own in the state where I live, which makes me want one so much more now?
The Death Valley National Park has become a flashpoint for anomalous activity. These phenomena are centered around the Devil's Hole cave system. Among the happenings, there are reports of shifting geography within the cavern, reality distortions, and even an otherworldly ecosystem of confounding creatures. Several investigators have been assigned to find the source of these anomalies, but most of them have gone missing. The ones who do come back report further implausible sightings and show symptoms of insanity. Nevertheless, people not only continued to visit the cave, but tourism increased. In an attempt to decrease the number of people going missing, the independent company Lucicorp took over expeditions to the cave and closed it to the public until it could be better understood and made safe for civilian activity.
Oftentimes, the best encouragement you can give a human being to go somewhere is a big red sign that says do not enter. Emilio Cruz and Cal Crookshank were no exception. After several years of becoming increasingly obsessed with the place following a series of online videos discussing the anomalies, Emilio convinced his college roommate Cal to check it out with him. Cal was always dismissive of anomalous phenomena, thinking the whole thing was a hoax. He figured that it was shut to the public anyways, and maybe if he went, Emilio would finally shut up about it for good. So, Cal agreed, and Emilio led them to the caves. The two of them managed to sneak past what little fortifications that Lucicorp labeled security with ease. That's the last time either of them was heard from, until Emilio showed up at a police station, 400 miles from the Devil's Hole. His family reported him going missing a month ago, but he swore he was only in the cave a couple days at most. Emilio's eyewitness description is as follows.
I figured we'd be fine. I did all the research. I thought the biggest thing to fear was a rock falling on my head. Cal was more scared of running out of water. We forgot about those concerns real quick though. Things seemed fine for the first few minutes, until we reached a dead end. We turned around to go back, but suddenly our path was stopped by a thick wall of glass in a blinding fractal pattern. It got closer to us, trapping us between it and the dead end as its pattern spread across the cave walls. Cal was panicking and cursing me for bringing him, but I managed to convince him to charge the encroaching fractal. Right before it crushed us, we grabbed onto each other and rushed. We broke through the thin glass wall. The part of the cave we were in looked nothing like it did before. The dead end was gone, and instead, we were in the middle of an intersection. We had 4 ways to go, but they all looked like the same endless path, except for the walls. In 3 directions, the cave walls moved like a wave. The 4th hallway, the one we went down, had smooth walls with perfect corners. They were still cave walls, but it felt like smooth, like someone built it. And it was lit like there were torches, but I didn't see any. The only reminder of where we were was the stalactites, arranged on the ceiling in perfect rows. Water dripped down them, creating tiny pools, shallow enough to see our reflections. They seemed to shimmer under the invisible torchlight. As we walked, we tried to avoid the puddles, but eventually, Cal stepped in one. Rather than cause a splash, he fell straight through. He was fully submerged before I even knew what was going on. I ran to the water and stuck my head in to see if I could find him, but I quickly realized these were more than just some puddles. Underneath the surface, they were connected by an unfathomably deep body of water. There were some elevated ledges on the sides of the cave, but at some points I couldn't see the bottom. The surface of the ledges were filled with bones. Some human, some I didn't recognize. In the middle of the lake was Cal, struggling to find his way out for a breath of air. I tried to shout at him. I just choked on the water. As he floated there, one of those little tiny pupfish swam up to him. I had no idea those things lived so deep. Cal looked it in the eye. He seemed to find some calmness in that moment. That was until the tiny blue fish opened its mouth, showing off layers of sharp teeth so bright I could make out every single one of them. Thousands of pairs of eyes opened on the sides of the cave. More pupfish than I could count raced out of the tiny nooks in the rocks. Cal tried to swim up, looking for the way out. He finally spotted me, but before he had the chance, a dozen pupfish bit down on his ankles. He let out a muffled scream as the fish dragged him down, his eyes bulging from the pressure. I saw a couple pupfish eyeing me, hoping I would try to save him. It was hopeless. Once they had him pinned at the bottom, the rest of the fish pounced. They devoured him. They left his neck and head alone at first, as if they wanted him to experience every moment of it. Within moments, Cal was picked clean, and the pieces of his skeleton drifted apart before settling amongst the other corpses. When they were done, the pupfish turned towards me and rushed the surface. My head shot out of the water, and I started sprinting before I even knew what was in front of me. I turned to see the mouth of the cave, just a few feet away where before there was an endless hallway. It was as if something was letting me out. I emerged in a totally different part of the valley from where I wandered. Thankfully, Cal made me bring enough water to last until I found my way back to town. I don't know what I experienced, but fuck those fish. Pupfish endangered my ass.
Endanger your ass? Don't mind if I do. Maybe next time a company called Lucicorp tells you not to go somewhere, don't. You know the phrase, curiosity killed the cat? Yeah, I've met your cats. They would have turned around. You fuckers are the one dying from curiosity. So let's talk about these fish so you idiots can go look for them. Emilio described them as pupfish. Devil's Hole pupfish are little bright blue fish found only in the waters of the Devil's Hole cave. Until now, their numbers have never been recorded at more than 500 individuals. But Amelia reported seeing thousands of these little guys, with notably different physiology than their commonly reported surface counterparts. Pupfish are known for their ability to live in low oxygen environments, so that's likely how they were able to sustain such a massive population much deeper within the Devil's Hole. Whatever the hell ate Cal certainly wasn't the harmless herbivorous pupfish we're familiar with, though. To make things easier, I'm gonna call the larger carnivorous pupfish a wolffish. I know that wolffish already exist, and it's confusing, but scientists can't name things for shit anyway. So why should I have to be the one that has to change? Wolffish hunt in a pack, much like piranha and wolves. Also like piranha, they tear their victims apart with admirable efficiency, leaving behind only bones, or to use the scientific term, dog toys. These fish are not only fearsome, but the underground body of water they inhabit seems to be anomalous. From above, the entrances to the lake look only like puddles, but this is actually due to the light that emanates from the caverns above the lake. This light reflects off the top of the lake in a manner where it makes the water look only inches deep, when in reality it's connected to a deep lake with a violent riptide that quickly sucks the victim into the center. No one knows exactly where the light comes from, but it seems to emanate somewhere from within the cave walls. Sometimes victims would step in on their own, but it seems as though the wolffish are aware of how cute they look, and they use it to lure humans, both to touch the puddle and to their doom. Just look at this old guy. How could anyone suspect what he is planning? That's when they get you. The first drop of blood in the water summons a horde of fellow wolffish, who chomp up your fleshy bits, like, well, wolves, or fish. I don't know. My favorite part about the endangered pupfish is how they taste when I eat them. Hey, so now that we've seen the critters, before the finale, which one do you think would be the best to see fight? Who do you think wins? Which one would you eat? Yeah, me too. I feel like it would taste like a cowtopus. Look, I'm not playing Smash or Pass anymore unless I go broke.
The Death Valley National Park has become a hotspot for anomalous activity. Among the discovered happenings, there have been reports of shifting geography within the cave, reality distortions, and even an entirely separate ecosystem of otherworldly creatures. Several investigators have been assigned to find the source of these anomalies, but most of them have gone missing on their expeditions. Consumed by the cave, never to return. Or so it was thought. Mr. Richard Gray was among the first of the investigators to enter the cave. He had one successful expedition in which he documented the religious practices of the humanoid race of the people of the cavern before being chased out. Despite his protests, Mr. Gray was sent in for a second investigation of the cave system and did not return. After several subsequent investigators had been lost to the cavern, Mr. Gray emerged from the cave, looking notably unkempt and malnourished. He displayed many telltale signs of insanity, showing a wide range of intense emotion in only a short time, and having numerous violent outbursts during the time being interviewed. In the first 2 hours, he would occasionally grant his interviewer interesting responses amongst the outbursts of hysterical ramblings, violent threats, and sewer slide all ideations, to use the monetizable pronunciation. Among the information Mr. Gray provided to the staff, many of the things he stated were particularly concerning. Mr. Gray seemed to know the names of every subsequent investigator that entered the cave, despite being missing for the time of their recruitment and deployment. He even claimed to know what happened to each of them, claiming numerous horrors, each more fantastical and ridiculous than the last, were responsible for their disappearance or demise. The second parts of these statements could not be verified. However, he described the process of each of their deployment down to the unique instructions that they were given. Mr. Gray, despite his clear insanity, was reporting factual information that he had no possible way of knowing. While there was a full 3-hour recording and written transcription of the interview, all evidence was destroyed in the process. The information left is from the interviewer's memory. Mr. Gray claimed that not all of them were dead, but that they weren't coming back. As he put it, they now belonged to her. He also began referring to the cave as its own entity, saying she doesn't want you to send anyone else in. Mr. Gray listed every agent's name and assignment correctly, down to the exact instructions. He also had encyclopedic knowledge of the cave's ecosystem. The investigator listed giant fish monsters, a room that turns any organism who ventures into it into a statue, a spider with human biology, creatures that are legally distinct from the ones from the descent, and caverns that lead to pits that are literally bottomless. The final statement that Mr. Gray made was that the cave was alive. After this statement, Mr. Gray went completely silent for a moment before he began screaming. The screaming looked as if it were not caused by anger or madness, but instead a terrible pain. His lips then shut, and his cheeks puffed out as his stomach made a gurgling noise and his mouth filled with liquid. Mr. Gray then projectile vomited a stream of what appeared to be blood directly into the investigator's open mouth. The investigator vacated the room in panic and disgust, puking onto the floor of the waiting room. Upon re-entry to the investigation room, despite formerly being strapped to a chair with leather binds, Mr. Gray was gone. He was only alone in the room for 10 minutes, and upon hearing a loud bang, the investigator entered to see he had not only ripped through his restraints, but had dug through the concrete floor and escaped. He had destroyed the recording device, and all of the notes taken were missing. He had left a trail of flesh, and all 10 of his bloody fingernails were ripped and strewn about in the dirt. There was a trail of sloppily painted symbols written in blood, all the way back to the mouth of the Devil's Hole. While these symbols were hastily created, it was unmistakably the same cultish iconography painted around Death Valley and in the Devil's Hole. The interviewer was instructed to transcribe everything he could remember, but was quickly overtaken by what looked to be the same symptoms of madness as Mr. Gray, and began attacking those around him before sprinting towards the cave. Security on site was ordered to dispatch him, and he was terminated with a headshot. The CEO of Lucicorp has promised to begin efforts to dismantle the Devil's Hole tourism infrastructure program, in hopes that none of the lives lost to the cavern will be in vain.
Come one, come all, to the grand opening of the Devil's Hole Nature Preserve, where you and the whole family can experience things God never intended. Explore the constantly changing cavern maze, meet fun locals, and enjoy our state-of-the-art zoo. Order on the app and receive 2 free children's tickets to the Slime Dragon Lazy River.
Lucicorp is not responsible for any damages to the property, persons, or sanity sustained while visiting the Devil's Hole Nature Preserve.
If you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with all notifications enabled, or I'll feed you to the cave, which, now that I know it's a she, you know. I mean, I don't, but maybe you do. I want to thank Dead Rex for drawing all these spooky critters. I'd like to thank Biodegradable for editing this video. They're a great editor, and you should go watch all of their things. Shout out the Inner Circle. Love y'all.